Echo of Death, a Tom and Scott mystery, fifth book in the series. By Mark Richard Zubro, publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, narrator, Eric Ost. Acknowledgements. For their kind help and patience, Barb D'Amato, Hugh Holton, Rick Paul, and Kathy Pekaiser Reed. Chapter 8. I'm hungry, Scott said. We were heading west on Ontario Street. Without a word, I swung into the rock and roll McDonald's claimed to be the busiest one in the world. There were only 2 cars in front of us in line. I pulled to the drive-up and looked at my passengers. Todd sniffed. I thought that if we were back in the Victorian era at this moment, he'd have put his handkerchief to his mouth and had to a spell. Scott and I ordered a lean burger each and some diet soda. Scott also got a vanilla milkshake. I controlled myself from such excess. I knew he probably wouldn't finish it all, and I'd get a lot of it. We ate as I drove, Todd in the dashboard holding the excess provender. I wound up draining the last third of the shake. I knew it would probably make me head for the John fairly soon, but I couldn't resist the vanilla treat. As we drove down Orleans Street, Todd asked the question, "How did you guys get into this anyway?" I blurted it out before I could stop myself. Scott didn't listen to me. Proctor took advantage of him. I warned him. "You weren't my parents," Scott said. I wanted to be kind to somebody. That's not a bad thing. He wouldn't have been able to turn to us if you'd listened to what I said the first time you brought him home. This hadn't been the first time Glenn Proctor stayed at our place. So you're psychic. You know the future. You always knew this was going to happen. I know you shouldn't have had anything to do with him. Your judgment wasn't so good in this case. Like there have been other cases? I'm not saying that. Then what are you saying? That it's my fault? That we're in this? I feel like shit about everything that's happened to us. But you don't have to rub it in. That's what you always try to do, rub it in. I was just pointing out. That's what you always try to do. Just point out, and what you mean is that I've screwed up again. I don't want to be just pointed out anymore. I don't need. You're not being fair. You didn't let me finish. If you just listened, since we were shouting at the same time, we couldn't hear what the other was saying anyway. At the corner of Orleans and Chicago, I almost bashed the truck into the back of a bus. The screeching tires and motion that flung us forward silenced our argument. Wrappers and cartons got flung around the cab. Todd spoke into the silence. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up. I've been friends with you both a long time. Why don't we let it rest until the danger is past? I wanted to tell him to shut up, but then I'd feel even more like a petulant schoolboy. I felt awful for yelling at Scott, but I was too angry to take it back. The fury and the frustration of the past few days had just boiled over. We both grumbled agreement to Todd's suggestion. We proceeded in silence. I was also embarrassed about finding in front of someone I used to always be angry at my parents for their insistence that you keep your mouth shut in front of guests. They could have been arguing furiously a minute before guests began to arrive for a party, but when people showed up, they were perfect host and hostess. I always thought it was a blatant hypocrisy until I got older, and far too many of my coupled friends used the occasion of someone's visit to needle, nag, or tear into their mates. Now I felt awful for fighting in front of Todd. I took Chicago Avenue over to Halsted and up to Goose Island. The security firm had headquarters in one of the plethora of converted warehouses that teemed in this neighborhood. I parked the car on Bliss Street in a no parking zone, exactly in front of the entrance. I didn't want to be on the street for 1 second longer than necessary. At least the lack of traffic in the area was a minor assurance that we hadn't been followed. The front desk had one clerk monitoring a switchboard live with blinking lights. We waited patiently for a break. When we finally had his attention, Todd told him he needed to speak to Anton Frobisher. Mr. Frobisher is in a meeting, and he can't be disturbed, the functionary said. Tell him it's Todd Bristol, Todd commanded. He used a lawyerly voice that got through to the clerk. The connection was made, words were spoken, and a minute later we were ushered into a room with 9 people in it. A few sat at a large conference table. One talked on a phone in a corner. Most stood in clumps, talking earnestly. They wore the kind of clothes you wear on a quiet evening at home. A few wore security guard uniforms. One man separated himself from the group and came over. Introductions over Frobisher said, "We're here because of the failure of Bernie and Angelo. Nothing like that has ever happened to the firm. They're good men. Mostly we've got contracts with businesses, banks, factories like that. A few years ago, one of our bank guards was wounded. That's the worst that's ever happened. That you got kidnapped is awful. Everybody is really upset." Todd told them we needed more guards. I thought this would be a simple request, but Anton brought this news to a group to our right, and soon the entire assemblage faced us in a semicircle. Debate raged among them over whether or not they should supply more guards to us. The crux of the problem was the obvious and immediate danger. "You can't refuse us," Todd said at one point. "These men need protection, and that's what you do." This brought outrage and anger from some of them. Finally, Anton said, "Todd, you've been a friend for a long time, and we'd like to help, but even if we said yes, I'm not sure any of our operatives would agree to do the job." "They're your employees," Todd said. "They have to do what you say." "Within reason," Anton said. "Isn't danger supposed to be an assumed part of their job?" Todd asked. "After all, they do carry guns. They're supposed to protect people." Anton admitted this was so. "Maybe if you told them they'd be guarding Scott Carpenter, the baseball player," Todd said. "That should convince some of them." Fortunately, no fuss had been made about Scott's fame so far. These people were too upset by events to go into a fan mode. Anton said, "We can try, but we won't force anyone to take on this job. It would be bad for the company. What if you guys decided to sue?" "We don't want to file a lawsuit," I said. "We just want protection." "Is there another company?" Scott asked. "Not that I've dealt with," Todd said. Within an hour, 3 guards showed up, pulled in perhaps by the lure of Scott's name or the hint of danger, or simply because they needed the overtime. We formed a caravan of 3 vehicles. 2 men, Frank and Jack, rode an Oldsmobile in front of us, and Bruno, who looked like a former linebacker, rode in his 15-year-old Chevy behind us. We took Chicago Avenue all the way east to Michigan Avenue, and then south to the Prudential Building where the Mexican consulate was housed. On the way, Todd informed us that many countries located their consulates in various business skyscrapers, concentrated on the east side of the loop. Scott and I did not exchange a word. The parking garage was quiet. We were the only ones on the elevator. We were forced to stop on the first floor and sign in, and after a call to the consular offices, we resumed our ride up the elevator. On the 20th floor, we emerged into a foyer with gray carpeting and white walls. To the right were the offices of a law firm. To the left was a hall down which we saw the lights coming from only one room. The offices consisted of a large reception area, a conference room, and 3 private offices. Travel posters promoting the joys of vacationing in Mexico filled the walls. 4 people met us, a man and a woman, both in their early 40s, were introduced as Mexican police officials. Another woman was from the Mexican Fine Arts Museum. The 4th was a man from the consular office. Before the meeting started, I called Bill Proctor's car phone and told him we now had guards and could meet him at our place. We sat in the conference room, which had a view of Grant Park, the Art Institute a block or 2 away, and the traffic on Michigan Avenue. Our guards sat in the outer office. Introductions over, I explained what had been happening to us. I finished with, "We understand the Federico Torres connection from all that's been told to us. Can you help us out of this mess?" The woman cop, who seemed to be the spokesperson for the group, said, "We'll help all we can, but unfortunately, it may not be much. We are also very much in the dark. We have 3 possible problems: drugs, jewels, and relics." Her name was Rosarita Montez. She wore a great skirt, white blouse, and thin gold chain around her neck. Her lustrous black hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She continued, "Because of Glenn Proctor, your lives are now entwined with the drug cartels. You had a first-hand experience with how dangerous that is. What you don't know is that we became suspicious of Glenn Proctor some time ago." "He was a problem before?" I asked. "His father and mother had many business dealings in Mexico that are honorable and are a great help to our country," said the consular official. Rosarita didn't ignore him or seem angry, but she dug in her heels. "We came here with the knowledge that Glenn appeared in the presence of both Pedro and Federico Torres, who are now arch rivals. We are reasonably certain Glenn was using the name Scott Carpenter." So he'd planned this for some time, I said, if he had a fake passport and everything. We don't have all those proofs, Resurreator said. What we do know is that he hung around each of them for several days. Your information tells us what he found. We have no evidence that his father or mother had or have dealings with the drug lords. But you have suspicions, Scott said. We check out every possible lead, she said. I wish we could talk to her without the counselor official present. Maybe it would be possible later. Pedro and his brother broke about 2 years ago. Pedro is the head of a paramilitary group consisting mostly of people who have grievances against Federico, probably over the spoils of the drug trade. The male cop, Hidalgo Lopez, said, The rivalry is bitter. Anyone getting mixed up in their fight could be killed by either side. We don't know what kind of deal he was trying to make. There are huge rewards on both Pedro's and Federico's heads, Resurreator said. How much is huge? I asked. Over 7 million on Federico, around 1 million on Pedro. The international community wants these guys. Glenn would be tempted by either reward, I said. The cops glanced at each other. Glenn had lots of plans and schemes, I said. Each was more ludicrous than the next. He could have gotten himself into anything to make some money. Remembering the talk with his brother Bill, I said, Glenn desperately wanted to prove himself to his father and mother by making a success of himself. He knew his baseball career was dead. He wanted to try and make a quick killing in Mexico and come back and show them how well he could do. So, Todd said, he could have been dealing drugs or dealing in drug lords. My clients know nothing of all this. But they must think you do, Resurreator said. By using the name of Scott Carpenter, he involved you deeply. We know, I said. They came to my place to kill me, Scott said. Whoever it was thought it was me because he used my name. We looked enough alike so that someone could easily have mistaken us. I don't mean to sound ignorant, Hidalgo said, but to many of my people, all North Americans look alike. So if you found something out, where's the proof? I asked. Where's the threat to these people? What did Glenn do with it? We don't have it in this case. They killed the right person by accident. How close Scott came to being murdered because of Glenn's stupid schemes, I didn't like to think. They are still after us. Therefore, something remains a threat. Stowalski said Glenn was sending his information north, not taking it with him. Where is it? They must not have it. The assumption must be that you were working together with him. Where did he go the first night he came back to this country? To your place? Somehow they think you know. And there's no way to meet with them, Scott said, to try to reason. Children, babies, whole families have died in the drug wars. They wouldn't care about killing someone they didn't know and was even a remote danger. Information such as Brad Stowalski described would be plenty threatening enough for them to still be after you. Why not just change everything, I asked. Why keep bothering us? Maybe it is easier to get rid of you than to upset their plans. You want to move from comfortable, safe houses because some rich punk idiot finds information? Maybe Proctor stumbled onto their main distribution route and plans into this country. He might not have told Stowalski everything. We talked about what to do for a while, but got nowhere. We just didn't know anything, and no one had any suggestions about what we could do to remove the threat. A drug summit between us and them to convince them we were innocent bystanders didn't seem likely to happen. After 30 minutes of this, the counselor official said, There are other possibilities. Miss Montez mentioned relics earlier. We should explain. The archaeologist spoke up. The traffic in pre-Columbian relics out of Mexico is a scandal. Illegal trafficking is outlawed, but it goes on. And then you have dealing in fake relics. We're talking about millions of dollars. Fake relics, Scott asked. Oh, yes, people desperately want pre-Columbian artifacts. It has become much more difficult to get the real ones out of the country, although certainly not impossible. But enterprising thieves have managed to start a lucrative market in the fake items. Some of it is really poor quality, but that doesn't seem to matter. Selling fake art is hardly a phenomenon unique to Mexico. Let me get this straight, I said. Glenn could have been being chased by someone who had stolen a relic or a fake one? Some are priceless. Unscrupulous collectors would pay a fortune for some of the finds. They pay huge sums of money for items that have little intrinsic value, Hidalgo said. Customs officials, police on both sides of the border, governors. Try to stop the pillage. Brad Stawalski didn't tell you the whole story by half. Brad has been stumbling around the countryside, trying to make a quick score. He's been to the diggings, he's been spotted with known relic thieves, then he hooked up with Glenn. So Brad had been far more honest with us. I'd sat for an hour of this when finally the vanilla shake from earlier began to rumble in my stomach. I squirmed in extreme discomfort for 15 minutes. Finally, I announced I had to use the John. I was given a key for a room down the hall. As I exited the office area, Resurita caught up to me. I didn't want to stop, but she grabbed my arm. There is the real possibility that either Mr. or Mrs. Proctor, both of whom have great sums of money invested in Mexico, or behind some kind of deal that went bad. A diplomat would never make such a charge against, because the investment money from two such prominent real estate people means a great deal to our country. I told her we would have to talk more in a minute. I practically tore out of her arm. I hurried past the banks of elevators and darkened offices. At the far end of the corridor, I unlocked the John door and hurried in. Minutes later, feeling much relieved, I washed my hands as I pulled down the towel to dry them. I thought I heard voices in the hall. Maybe others were taking an opportunity for a break. I swung open the door, stepped into the hall, and instantly pulled myself back. I'd seen the back of a bald head. I knew he'd have a blonde mustache that reached down below his chin. I didn't hear feet running toward me, so I presumed I hadn't been spotted. I needed to go for help. The swiftness with which some of these groups killed might mean that Scott and the rest had only minutes or seconds to live. Carefully, I opened the door. I managed only a glimpse of 3 men with machine guns watching the corridor outside the office I'd been in. I was too far away to make a rush toward them down the hall. I had no weapon, so I needed a plan. I had to get out. But all possibility of plans soon vanished. I heard voices again. I heard loud protest. For a few moments, from one of the Mexican cops, I heard a slight thud, a gasp, and no more protest. I waited behind the shut John door. I checked the ceiling to see if it was the kind you could remove the tiles from and crawl away through the ceiling. It wasn't. If I was caught here, there was no escape. I listened intently. I heard the elevator doors open, and a minute later close. No sounds penetrated through the washroom's door. I checked my watch. I waited a minute, then 2. Finally, I eased the washroom door open. The first thing I saw was the remnants of the top of the head of Hidalgo. The Mexican cop, the pop and thud I'd heard had been his taken a bullet between his eyes. A large portion of his brains was smeared on the wall and carpet behind and under his head. Still, I heard no sound. I continued inching the door open. The corridor was empty. I eased myself into the hall. Still listening, I crept down the carpet past the still warm body and toward the conference room we'd been in. One of the guards lay crumpled on the ground. His head was in worse shape than the Mexican cop's. The only thing moving besides me in the office were drops of blood from the corpses. I grabbed the nearest phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher told me to stay put. The cops would be here in seconds. I hurried to the elevator. I wasn't about to wait while they could be hurting Scott. I pressed the down and up buttons. It might have been all of 20 seconds before the elevator arrived. I thought it might have been hours. As the doors opened, I flattened myself against the wall. No gun barrel peeked out. No person emerged. I leaped on and pushed the button for the ground floor. The car made no stops on the way down. In the lobby, the security people looked at me in bewilderment. Obviously, captors and captured hadn't gone this way. I ran to the parking garage level. The attendant in the booth at the exit gate was outside and cursing while clutching shards of the broken gate in his hands. I rushed to my truck, jammed the key in the ignition, shoved it into gear, and roared toward the exit. The parking attendant held up his hands to try and stop me. I gunned the engine. He leaped out of the way. I pulled to the edge of the driveway on Randolph Street and stopped. They must have gone right, because Randolph is one way, going west, but no vehicle was stopped at the light at the corner of Michigan Avenue. Traffic further down Randolph toward the west and on Michigan, going north and south, flowed normally. I'd been in a big rush and had absolutely nowhere to go. No vehicle description, no idea where they might have been taking Scott. What they might have done with the other people. I could wait for the cops, or I could search. The parking attendant hurried up. I interrupted his imprecations early on. "What kind of car just drove out?" I asked. He continued to berate me. I opened the door, climbed down, and grabbed the guy by the front of his shirt. I didn't have time to remember Miss Maynard's guide to throttling important information out of someone. By the time I got through to him and found out they had left in a black van, there wasn't one anywhere in sight. I sat back in my truck, put my hands at the 12 o'clock position on the steering wheel, and rested my head on them. I could race around and around endless blocks and ever-widening concentric circles and drive for hours uselessly, or I could sit there in frustration and fear. I wanted to choose neither, but my choice was made for me by the arrival of building security, with the cops mere seconds behind them. And then it was an hour of questioning. Of course, Belowski and Quinn showed up. I don't remember giving anyone a reasonable or even sensible answer. All I knew was that Scott was gone and in danger, and I was helpless. I called Bill Proctor's car phone again and told him the latest. He was aghast and asked whether he could help. He had insisted that it was more important than ever that we meet. I needed to think. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at nearby Buckingham Fountain in half an hour. When the cops were finished talking to me, Quinn was nice enough to offer to have somebody drive me home, or to call somebody to get me. I told him no. He said, "We've still got cops outside your building, and one of ours is doing security. You'll be able to go home tonight." "After I find Scott," I said. It was midnight. Time to meet Bill Proctor. I wondered why he'd been so insistent about having to meet. Maybe he'd have information that would lead to Scott. I returned to my truck and made a slow exit down Randolph Street, then south on Michigan. I took Monroe Street with the Art Institute and the Petrillo Music Shell on my right, and then continued out to Lakeshore Drive. I wanted to make a complete circuit of Grant Park and the area around the fountain before I made any stops. I wanted to check for possible traps and to see whether I was being followed. Grant Park was constructed from the dregs of the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The good citizens took the debris from the conflagration and dumped it in the lake to create a park. Buckingham Fountain, which sat in the middle, had long since been turned off for the winter. I made a complete circuit of the rectangle around the fountain, out Monroe to Lakeshore Drive, south to Balboa Drive, and west back to Columbus Drive. I craned my neck in all directions at every second, paying just enough attention to traffic to avoid an accident. As it was, I got honked at viciously and heard brakes squealing behind me when I pulled back onto Columbus going north. During the day, it was almost impossible to park on Columbus Drive, but at this time on a Monday night, especially with the dark and dreary weather, fewer than half the parking spaces were filled. I pulled up to the light where Congress Parkway runs into Grant Park. I was 3 cars from the intersections, with 2 cars behind and a line of traffic on my left. With the oversized wheels, the view from my truck gave me an excellent perspective over the tops of all the vehicles. Finally, I spotted Bill Proctor standing next to the fountain. I took another long look around the line of cars in the lane on my left, inched forward enough so that a red Toyota pulled up next to me. The passenger's side window slid down a few inches and I saw the glint of the barrel of a gun. No car was parked on my right. I swung the truck over and jumped the curb as the wheels thumped and rumbled. I heard several shots and the glass in the back of the cab shattered. Another bullet struck the roof. I raced over the pavement to Proctor, threw open the door, and shouted, "Get in!" He looked bewildered. The thought flashed through my head that maybe he was part of an elaborate setup, or whoever was shooting was after him, too. He tumbled into the cab. Before he had the door shut, I tromped my foot onto the gas pedal. Too many trees stood in the way to drive over the grassy portions of the park. I rushed to the top of the stairs that led down to Lakeshore Drive, slammed on the brakes, eased up on the pedal, then thudded down the stairs. I glanced in the rearview mirror. They weren't following through the park, but it would take them only a minute or two to hurry around the park and come back this way. The traffic southbound was light. I swung the car to the right and sped toward the Field Museum of Natural History. "What the hell is going on?" Proctor asked. "Your fucking brother has managed to screw up a whole lot of everything. Bodies are piling up at an alarming rate. I might ask you the same questions. What the hell is going on? Why are we meeting here, and now? Who are all these people?" I don't know, Proctor said. Honest to God, I don't know what's going on, but I'm here because I want to help. I couldn't get away from the house any earlier. I think I found out some things. I roared past the museum and swung to the right to get into the lanes for the Stevenson Expressway. I wanted to get as far away as possible from any pursuit as quickly as I could. One thought blared in my head. Save Scott. Find him. Rescue him. Absolutely no one and nothing was going to get in my way for that. I thought of our fight in the car. Those weren't going to be the last words I ever said to him. When I saw him again, I'd never stop saying I love you. Proctor was silent for several minutes as we drove southwest down the Stevenson. He wore faded blue jeans that clung to his slender waist and hips with no belt. His shoes and socks were white. He wore an Oxford University sweatshirt. The radio was playing jangling jazz on WNB. I flicked it off. Noise was not what I needed. Out past Damon Avenue, I drummed my fingers on the wheel, clutched at it with white-knuckled fist, tapped my foot against the floor, or rapped my knuckles against the window. At around Cicero Avenue, Proctor said, "Tell me what's happened. Your brother is responsible for the danger my lover is in at this moment." My tone didn't invite conversation. He kept quiet until we passed First Avenue. "Do you want to know what I found out?" he asked. "At LaGrange Road," I said. "Yes. I've always been neutral during my parents' fights, as best I could. For a kid, that's tough. They always want to get me on one or the other side. I've got contacts in both organizations that I can go to for information." "Why don't you just ask your mom or dad? What's going on?" "Wouldn't whichever one knows the truth want to tell so they could get you on their side?" "Maybe neither one knows the truth or wants to tell me the truth," he said. I pulled onto the ramp from the outbound Stevenson to the northbound Tri-State Trawway. I cruised through the eternally under-reconstruction road. In the past couple of years, but especially with the new North American Free Trade Agreement, there's been a lot more activity on setting up more business in Mexico, like jockeying for position, trying to open up more maquiladoras. "What's that?" I asked. Them, maquiladoras, are factories in Mexico, where they assemble imported parts for re-export to this country without tariffs. They pay Mexican workers far below the minimum wage in the United States to manufacture products way cheaper than they can in America. "I understand. Anyway, my sources said Glenn was supposed to be helping with some of the dealings and getting information from my mother on my dad's projects, but he was working for him at the same time." I told him I knew this. "Well, what happened is that they found that out down there in Mexico. So my dad's security people and my mom's security people were after him, to find him and to figure out what he was doing. He was in big trouble. My mom and dad were supposed to go down there. They were supposed to have some big confrontation between them, with Glenn as the sort of go-between or hostage or sacrificial lamb, depending on who got to him first. So what happened? The big meeting never came off. Everybody flew down to Mexico, but Glenn disappeared. My source says he thought Glenn hooked up with some of his old drug buddies. Both of my parents had people searching for Glenn, and they began to run across drug groups and relic groups hunting for him. A couple of people and the Mexican authorities told us about some of the drug and relic business. I explained what had happened at the Prudential building. "Damn," he said. "They could all die," he said very softly. "I've got to find Scott," I said. "There's supposed to be a big meeting here between my mom and dad and their security people. Something strange is going on. Somebody else knows for sure he's dead. Your mom seemed genuinely surprised when we told her." Glenn's eyes misted over. "Could one of them have killed him?" he asked. "I don't know. I hope not, for Bill Proctor's sake. I'd like to be there for the big meeting," I said. "I don't know where or when it is," Bill said. "Would your sources tell you?" "Maybe. I could at least ask. I wish we could find that stuff he was supposed to send north." "I don't know how," Glenn said. I thought about it until we neared the Deerfield Toll Plaza. I had to go north, the next exit, turn around, enter the Trollway, going south, and take the extension toward the Edens Expressway. "At your house, you mentioned that Glenn sent a drug shipment up here for his high school buddies. How did he do that?" The best way to send drugs to this country is to ship them in with regular stuff that would normally be coming north. You just add it to the regular shipment as much as whatever it's supposed to be. Tea sets, spoons, light bulbs, whatever. You mislabel the stuff, it gets past customs and comes up here. This smuggling it over the border shit is small time. The really big stuff comes in legitimately. There's too much for it to be smuggled piecemeal. You sound like you know all about it, I said. I have nothing to do with drugs or smuggling, Bill said flatly. You can believe that or not. I'm helping you because something happened to my brother. I want to know why he died and who was responsible. I loved him. I'm going to get to the bottom of it. If we can help each other, great. If not, that's fine too. We drove in silence the entire length of the Edens to the junction with the Kennedy Expressway. Bill said, the information on the Torres people. Why did Glenn want to send that north? So that he would have a copy to use as leverage to save his skin if he got caught? If he thought that, it didn't work. Or if he made the threat to them, maybe they figured they could get the information some other way and didn't need him. I said, or he told them Scott and I had it, so they killed him and came after us. The bastard. He might have been desperate. I don't know what I'd say in that situation. I'm not sure anybody would. I wanted to avoid fighting with Bill about his brother. I'd had one awful argument, and while I wasn't close to Bill Proctor, I didn't need more grief and guilt. Sending the information would probably require copies. He wouldn't want to keep something like that with him. He'd have backups, so where would they be? No packages of any kind came to our house today. I saw the mail first. Could have come to one of your parents. Maybe. But these guys were after you. There's got to be a connection with you guys. It could still be in the mail or in one of those delivery services. Didn't you tell me Glenn promised to tell you guys everything on Sunday? Yeah. Maybe that's what he was waiting for, the delivery. Post office is closed on Sundays, and today, for that matter, it's Columbus Day. Glenn did seem awful nervous when we left for the fundraiser the other night. Maybe it was because his package hadn't come. So it had to be some company that delivers on weekends. Who does that? I don't know. I realized I was supposed to be in school within a few hours, teaching teenagers the mysteries of the writing process. If I didn't find Scott, I wouldn't be there. I was near downtown Chicago, so I pulled off at the Ohio Street off-ramp and drove to Scott's place. I walked up to the blue and white squad car outside and announced that I was going in. I asked for an escort. The attractive dark-haired cop with a bushy mustache led us upstairs. He inspected the premises and declared them free of hostile people. He left. Bill and I looked in the phone booth and called every delivery company available from the post office's 800 number. We got the number and address for the overnight express expediter in Chicago. No one answered the phone. It was just after 2. We had numbers we could call back when they opened in the morning. I suggested try going over to the overnight express office. Someone had to be there to be doing the overnight express sorting, didn't they? It seemed like quite a useless endeavor, but we had no other leads, and I was desperately frightened for Scott. You never know about the post office, Bill said as we drove over. They make all kinds of mistakes. If Glenn sent it through them, who knows, a couple of times when I was in college, my parents sent me stuff overnight express. It never got there the next day. They always got their money back. The office was on the west side. In fact, only 4 blocks from Mrs. Proctor's warehouse. We drove through the deserted streets. The only ones out were the homeless, who didn't mind the chilly but reasonably warm weather for October. The office was the bottom floor of another formerly decrepit warehouse. We found the doors in front locked, but around the back we found trucks being loaded and unloaded. We were directed to an office in the center of the building. There we found a woman less than 4 feet high with 2 fingers on her left hand missing and a rash on her face that made her face look as if someone had dropped scalding water on it not 5 minutes ago. She smiled at us. Joanna Andrews was not only sympathetic, but incredibly helpful. She looked disappointed when we didn't have a receipt number from the packaging to give her, but she simply called up the computer and said, "We've got 1,000,000 of these to go through. I can help you look. It's going to take a while to find something. How much time you got?" As much as it takes, I said. We scrolled through the record after record for over 2 hours. I was exhausted. We took a break for a cup of coffee. Are you supposed to be showing us all this? Proctor asked. No, she said cheerfully. But somebody who works for the post office has to be a nice person. I'm it. So don't get used to it. 20 minutes after we started working again, we found it. Joanna tapped the screen. Package from Glenn Proctor to Scott Carpenter. Supposed to be delivered to an address on Lakeshore Drive. Says here it arrived and was delivered on Saturday. Signed for by Beatrice, according to this. It's there. It's not, I said. We don't have anybody named Beatrice working in the building. I'm sure of it. Joanna scrolled a bit further. Oh, she pressed another button. Somebody dropped it back in a mailbox. Why? I asked. Maybe Beatrice figured out it wasn't hers and was embarrassed to give it to anyone because they might say something like, look stupid. How could you sign for something that is so obviously not yours? So where is it? Bill asked. Here, somewhere. They tried to deliver it today, but no one named Carpenter was at home at the address given. Minutes later, she found it, and we were back in my truck, ripping open the contents. The box was approximately 2 feet long, 1 foot wide, and 1 foot deep. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.